Hey everyone, welcome to the Outlaw Nation and welcome to this special spoiler-filled review of this new 30 for 30 documentary from ESPN called Be Water, a exploration of Bruce Lee's life from 1960 to 1972. I'm excited to talk about it. I know it's got a lot of buzz on social media. And to my immediate right or left, depending on how you're looking at this, is my co-host of the CineFiles and the closest live expert I know of Bruce Lee in my circle of friends, Steve Morris. How are you, Steve?
I'm very good. Thank you for having me on the show. And I am proud to be the small distinction of the person who knows most about Bruce Lee of your immediate friends.
Well, I mean, as soon as this, and we've covered Bruce Lee on the Cinephile Show, on our show, we went round and round about how much we love him and how much he influenced you in the martial arts and how much he influenced me in different ways, certainly to appreciate martial arts movies and love them for what they can be. But this documentary was a really fascinating insight into this man. And I wonder how much of this you already knew going in ahead of time. Certainly there, if you've seen the Dragon movie or Dragon, the Bruce Lee story movie, a lot of what Rob Cohen puts in that movie is kind of touched on in this documentary. But I found myself, Steve, to be really shocked about how much he did as a child actor and also what his philosophy, how as it changed, what he was able to do from that one exhibition in Long Beach in 1964, how he was able to begin this process of changing people's perception about martial arts. What did you think overall about the documentary, and did anything surprise you as you were watching it this time?
So I absolutely love the doc. I thought it was great, and I've seen, I think, pretty much every Bruce Lee documentary there is. Mm-hmm. And what's so interesting is, like, you ask if I was surprised, and it's like I don't think there was a piece of footage in there that I hadn't seen. Because what's weird about Bruce Lee is that there's so little of him, and yet there's so much fascination with the person. And I don't know how many documentaries there are. I've seen at least 5 or 6 Bruce Lee documentaries. Right. And I saw the stuff about him being a child actor. I've seen that audition tape. I've seen that interview. But what's so amazing about what they did in the documentary, and it just really shows what good filmmaking can do, is that what was surprising was how emotional I was about what I saw and how they transformed this footage I've seen over and over again into something just so much more powerful.
Yeah, it's a great point you bring up. And just to be fair to Steve Morris here, for everybody who's watching, Steve is a documentarian as well. So looking at it, and a filmmaker. So looking at it from that perspective as well as he's watching this thing. I agree with you, Steve. My friend Ace Cabrera tweeted, "I'm 11 minutes into the movie and I'm already emotional or crying." And I found this to be one of these documentaries that, for whatever reason, has another element of topicality to it because of what we see happening with Black Lives Matter, what we see happening about people being more emboldened to speak out about racism for the first time in a very, very long time in our country's history. We're seeing all over social media, and no one is saved from their past racist comments or tweets. And certainly this documentary leans into that of how we treat and have treated historically Asian people in this country, and specifically the Chinese.
I think that maybe was the one thing that was really unique, because the term, I think it's the model minority, which was used in this documentary. I had never heard that term until the day before I watched the documentary. And then I heard it twice. It's so weird. I heard it on my sister was talking to a good friend of hers who's Asian, who told her this term, and then I heard it on David Chang's podcast, and he talked about it. And then it's in the Bruce Lee documentary, and the way the Chinese minority has been treated in this country, I knew a lot about, but I didn't know this idea, like culturally, what the expectation was in terms of this idea of the model minority, and also, it's the way that they were stereotyped and how that affected culture is so profound in this movie.
Yeah. And we see it with multiple races throughout the history of this country in media. And the one quote that stuck out to me, and I want to make sure I get the quote correct, was from the filmmaker. I think one of the people that they interviewed talked about Hollywood is racist because America is racist. And then they kind of become a self-fulfilling prophecy, because as Hollywood keeps showing these racist images, people think of the certain race or minority in those terms. So it's a self-perpetuating thing that happens over and over again, and it takes people to finally step forward and break that cycle once and for all. And certainly that seemed to be what the documentary was presenting Bruce Lee to be, this kind of person who wanted to break these stereotypes about Chinese and about Chinese Americans.
Well, one of the things that I took a course when I was getting my master's at USC, and the course had a very intellectual sounding title, which was it was on blaxploitation in kung fu films.
Yeah,
and the professor is Todd Boyd, and there were so many things. Who's a very well known African American professor, and there's so many things that were sort of a revelation in that class. And one of the biggest ones was the importance of the reason those two things are together is the importance of these kung fu films to the African American community is huge. And part of the reason is that they played in the same theaters. Is that the blaxploitation films were playing in the theaters in these communities that were poorer and oppressed, and they were about empowerment, and they were about changing the image of those people. And then here comes Bruce Lee. And Bruce Lee, the you watch Fists of Fury where he kicks that, no dogs are Chinese sign. And that is, there were signs in Boston that said no dogs are Irish. There were signs in the South that said no dogs are a word that I would never say. Right. Like that experience translated so well to the African American experience, and I think that's part of why he was this movie is connected to civil rights, and why at this moment in time, man, it hits pretty hard.
Yeah, and also, Steve, it's fascinating to think about. Well, there have been already, we've seen in the past, and certainly Spike Lee's movie "Do the Right Thing" in 1989 highlighted the kind of simmering tension between the Black community and the Asian community as well. Maybe because of the way the Asian community is presented as the quote, as you said, model minority. That's how you should be. And of course, the film does touch on that, saying, using the Chinese as a way to go back at Black people and say, why can't you be more like that when you protest? Why can't you be more like that when you have an issue? And then eventually we will realize what's happening to you. Why can't you be more respectful? And that's that. So maybe that has another, another element between, going on between Asian and Black minorities here in this country, kind of purposely creating this divide between them so that they never come together to kind of fight back against the oppression that they sense.
Well, there's certainly, as a Jewish guy, there's certainly been a lot of pressure between Jews and the African American community to keep them apart. There's been pressure between poor people of different ethnicities to keep them apart, And I want to go back to what you said earlier, which is that great quote of Hollywood is racist because America is racist, is that people aren't born racist. We're not born with these prejudices. And you got to go, well, how do we get them? Where do they come from? And the most powerful thing in particularly the 20th century is the images on screen and on TV. So if all you see of African Americans is that they're servants and criminals, and every kid growing up in America, that's all they're seeing, well, then that's where it comes from. If all you see of Chinese Americans is that they're servants and that they're weak or feminized or speak in pidgin English, well, then that's what you think they are. You know?
Yeah. Well, and also, I mean, to touch on one more thing about the topicality of the film, the Hong Kong protests from way back then, and then the Hong Kong protests we just had recently, and then Black Lives Matter. I mean, there's such a correlative tissue, or connective tissue rather, between all three things here that give this documentary another element of power when you're watching it as well, that still we're dealing with this. Still we're seeing, the people in power stepping on minorities or people of lower class, what they deem to be lower class, in order to keep them in their place.
Well, and if you listen to Bruce Lee, I mean, this is so central to who he was, because if you listen to his interviews, there's so many times that he has said, and his actions reflect this, that I want to bring the beauty of my culture to the world and share it with everyone. And that applies to the fact that he taught students of all races in
Yes.
Oakland and in up in Washington, and that brought him in conflict with Chinese kung fu people. That's all really true. That really did happen. It didn't happen the way it happened in Dragon the Bruce Lee story, but it did happen. And that when he in becoming an actor, it's the same thing. Is that he wants to share the truth about his culture and the beauty of his culture in order to change these images. You know.
Yeah. And we have to factor in, Steve, you and I are a little bit of an older approach to a film like this. We've seen or watched most, if not all, of the stuff that was presented here. If you're a new person coming to Bruce Lee, or you're in that generation where you know a little bit about Bruce Lee, or even a medium amount of Bruce Lee, there's still stuff for you here to enjoy and savor and appreciate about the man and get more out of why you, or I don't know, deepen your fandom of Bruce Lee, not only as a martial artist, but as a person. And you can't really separate the two, to be honest with you. Bruce Lee says that over and over again in his own words, in his own writings, about how it's an extension of who he is. It is what he wants. It's what taught him how to put his discipline into his own life and his approach to the world.
Well, I mean, the thing that he says in that interview of, you know, to express yourself, to physically express yourself. He sees his martial arts as an expression of who he is. And really, the way that he designed Jute Keen Do and his fighting style is an expression of who he is. I just read the Zen and the Martial Artist because I knew we were going to be talking. And it's a super short, really good book. And it's a writer who went and studied with a whole bunch of different martial artists, including Bruce Lee. So there's a bunch of Bruce Lee stories. And it's, by the way, it's him. There's stories of him and Sterling Siliphant, the screenwriter, who we've talked about on the CineFiles. It's two of them in a private lesson with Bruce Lee, you know, which is just crazy to think about. But, you know, one of the things that he talked about is that, you know, is this guy is saying to Bruce, like, you know what, I'm too old to do these kicks, and it's really hard for me to do this. It's really hard for me to do that. And how do I overcome these limitations? And Bruce said, don't overcome the limitations. Embrace the limitations. Is that, and he told him, which is true, by the way, did you know that I have one leg that's 1 inch shorter than the other? So Bruce has one leg is 1 inch shorter, and that's part of why he picked the stance that he picked. His eyesight is really bad. Bruce has terrible vision. And so that's why he chose a martial arts style like Wing Chun, which is all about being in close and about touch, you know? And so, it's the, when we talk about him expressing who he is through martial arts, that's part of the expression.
Yeah, well, and one thing they touched on here is him studying under Ip Man, who has become a, you know, thanks to, I think, Donnie Yen, has become like reappreciated by the world of martial arts and people who enjoy Asian cinema as well. I mean, I think they're up to the fourth one. I think they might be going into prequels by now, but this is the man who Bruce Lee studied with. And I love the story they tell about him being frustrated with his studies, Bruce was, and going out into the, you know, water and, you know, punching the water out of frustration. And then that's when the moment hits him. And, you know, that's such a great story because, like, you can study with all the right people that you want, but if you don't find your own path to your enlightenment, then it's never really going to sink in. But I love that they highlight Ip Man. Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, what's interesting with Bruce Lee is how his martial arts evolve. You know, how you could see if you watch the footage in that Long Beach tournament that Ed Parker put on, you could see the Wing Chun. You know, it's right there. But then you also see that he's learning about jiu-jitsu, that he's learning about karate, that he was obsessed with Muhammad Ali and Sugar Ray Robinson. And you could see in his punching style what he gets from boxing and from those boxers is that he's continually evolving and he, you know, he's looking for new teachers all the time. And one thing I this Be Water thing is so profound. And as a guy who's done a lot of martial arts, and I got to say that, and this is why I'm really happy to talk on this show, is that I think Bruce Lee's one of the most influential people on my life, period. Because I saw Enter the Dragon when I was 9. I felt literally, like, by the end of the movie, I'm watching with my dad. By the end of the movie, I was standing up. I couldn't sit down, and I felt like there was electricity over my whole body. Like, that's how I had a physical response to this movie. And I took my first martial arts classes then. I started, but didn't study that long. And then at 18, I started studying martial arts. And with the exception of maybe 4 or 5 years when I was when I was too busy or I was injured, I've been doing martial arts ever since. And so the all of those years, all that time on the mat, all the sweat, all the, you know, belt tests and all that stuff and teaching would never have happened without Bruce Lee. And that idea of be water is so profound in terms both of martial arts and in terms of life. And like all good sort of Zen concepts, the more you think about it, the more you find. The more you study, the more you find. The more you practice, the more you have those epiphanies about what does that mean.
Right. And also, like you said, all good Zen principles, easy on the surface, difficult in practice, right?
Absolutely.
Easy on the surface, simple in approach, difficult in practice, which is why it takes a lifetime sometimes to really embrace it and understand it and put it into complete practice in your life.
Yeah, here's an example. It's not it's not one that Bruce talks about in the interviews, but I've heard him from this book that I read another place talking about this example. It's like you imagine like someone's throwing a strike at you, they're attacking, and you have to decide what to do. And so first you have to see the attack, and then you have to see what kind of attack is it, what its target, what's its angle, what's its speed, maybe what's the guy's reach, and then you have to come up with the idea of what to do, and then you have to execute it. And that might take a fraction of a second. You know, and people are good martial artists, so it happen faster. Someone who's never studied martial arts, it might not happen very fast. And then you might not go to the right place. You might make the wrong decision. And then you think about, well, what if I punch some water? How long does it take for the water to react to my punch? And the water reacts, there's no delay. As soon as you punch the water, right away. And you go, well, okay, you know what? I'm going to go faster and see if I can, you know, startle the water. No, you can't. Okay, you know what? I'm going to go really slow, and I'm going to like sneak up on the water. How long does it take for the water? And does the water ever go to the wrong place? The water always goes to the right place. It goes where it's supposed to go. It doesn't. There's no reaction time. And I think one of the things, and this again, it applies to life. It applies to this conversation right now. Is that you practice the thing over and over and over again to get to a place where you can just react, where you can just be like water. There is no delay, and that your connection with this other person, whether it's your opponent or someone in a conversation, is the same as the connection between the water and your hand. It's instant and it's perfect.
Yeah. One thing I really enjoyed about the documentary that they touched on near the end, you know, people feel the tragedy of Bruce Lee dying so young at 32 years old. They kind of try really hard to put to bed all the conspiracy theories about Bruce Lee's passing. And it's a terrible tragedy, cerebral edema edema at that age. But what they show in Enter the Dragon, that he wanted to weave his philosophy into his movies. Like most artists, right, that are truly great artists, it isn't just sitting with what already works. It is progressing what you create to really be a fully realized version of yourself, a fully expressed version of self-actualized version that you want to share with the rest of the world. And I think if he'd been given time, Steve, I think we've missed out probably on some of the most profound movies that could have come out, possibly even Oscar-winning Best Picture movie from Bruce Lee down the road, as more and more of his philosophy crept into his films.
100% agree. And in particular, like if you think about Jackie Chan, who I love, Jackie Chan, is very different from Bruce Lee, but Jackie Chan had 30 years to practice filmmaking. And so you see the difference between those early Jackie Chan movies and when you get to Legend of the Drunken Master and Super Cop and things like that are really polished. And it's like, well, Bruce never had that chance. But even looking at Return of the Dragon or Way of the Dragon, which is the one movie he did direct, there's a filmmaker there. There's like a thought there. You know, there's something he wants to say. So I totally agree with you.
Yeah. Let me ask you this. Did you like the technique of the film? You know, we've talked about Bruce Lee, both the inside and outside this documentary. Did you like the way that Bao Nguyen approached directing this documentary, having nobody on camera, having them be heard, no overall narrator? It was his daughter who was narrating, and then Linda Lee Caldwell as well as his widow, as well, Raymond Chow, Nancy Kwan, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, amongst a number of some of his former students, his brother as well. As so many people talking, did you like them as guides through these 12 years of his life, some former girlfriends as well, or would you have liked to have seen them on camera or as they were dictating what was happening in Bruce's life?
I think it totally worked. I think it's a very unusual choice. And first of all, having done documentaries, to do the documentary without narration is like working without a net. It's much harder in terms of editing to string your story together, because like what narration can do is it can bridge the gap between two pieces of interview, or give that piece of information in a brief, short, clear way. Whereas to do it with the interview is hard. And the traditional way to do it is, you know, as you're alluding to, is that I have the interview footage and I cut from the person talking to the thing that they're talking about. And I heard the director interviewed, and here was his reasoning, and I think this is really smart. Is he said these people were all young when all this is happening, and they're all old now. You know, Bruce would be 80 years old now. He'd be 80 years, you know, like this is, I mean, and so showing them, and I love that he showed them at the end. At the end, we just saw their faces. Is that I think it kept us in the world of youth, and this is the thing, and this is why, I mean, you know, if this was the CineFiles, we'd go be deep into the filmmaking. But the one thing I would say is that if you're interested in documentaries, go watch 2 or 3 other Bruce Lee documentaries, and then watch this, and you will see how documentaries are an art form. And like one of the other ones, that's a totally artistic choice. And one of the other choices is, you know, the basic way you would approach a story. The first thing you think of is, well, I'm going to go in order. I start with Bruce's birth. I start going, he's a kid, he's grown up in Hong Kong, he's the actor, he comes to the United States. That's not what they do at all. What they do is they start with that screen test footage where he's young and he hasn't fully become Bruce Lee. And then they cut to, and then they show us the world of some racism against, you know, the Chinese people in the United States. And then they cut to the opening of The Big Boss, his first film. And it's like that juxtaposition tells you something really important. It shows you by putting those things next to each other about how he evolves. And then it also gives us really early the Bruce Lee that we love, which is the amazing, charismatic martial artist. And so if you're not someone who knows a lot about Bruce Lee, or if you're someone who loves Bruce Lee, it doesn't, because if you do it linear, that's at the end of the movie. You don't get to that right away. And then it continues to be nonlinear. Then we go to his arrival in San Francisco, and then we go forward to him getting to Cato, and then we go back to him as a child actor, you know, and so we kind of go, and I think that, again, it's a really artistic choice, and it tells the story in a really unique way in terms of how this person became who he became.
Yeah, I enjoyed it too, because it added even more weight to every one of his obstacles or challenges that appeared in his life as he was creatively moving forward, going back in time to touch upon a certain time in his life, or a certain experience, or a series of experiences that maybe he drew upon to overcome that obstacle, overcome that challenge. We hear over and over again in the documentary how confident he was, how much he just believed he was going to achieve what he was going to achieve. Even those quick 4 sentences that he writes to Hawkins, man, I've had quite a time. You know, he's just basically saying, I have an idea of what I'm supposed to be doing, but it's difficult right now because there are obstacles in the way, but I know where I'm going. I'm just frustrated that things are stopping me from getting there. So, you know, over and over again, people speak about the fact that he had this overwhelming confidence. Now, did it sometimes veer into assholishness? Sure. But I think most of anybody who accomplishes anything can be accused of that at certain times, because they're so driven for a larger purpose, right? We see we see his former students talk about how he was so great. He taught us, didn't matter what color we were, didn't matter if we were male or female, he taught us. And then once Bruce understands where he's going, then more and more people come in, and those students all eventually drop away. And the guy who was being interviewed, that one of his former students, says, we understood Bruce was a product now. And so it's like that's that kind of thing. Like, they understood he was special. He was different. So you couldn't even put him through the normal human anger, because he was trying to do something larger for his race and for martial arts and for the human race, actually.
He had to become Bruce Lee. You know, and that's what, again, it's what's really interesting about starting with that screen test is that he's not Bruce Lee yet, you know, in terms of the iconic, bigger than life persona. He is the person that's heading in that direction. It's a really well done documentary. And one other thing, like things like his death is presented as a storm.
Yeah.
You know, and I found, again, I had seen most of that footage of his funeral before, but the way they intercut it and the way that we heard his wife Linda talk about it was so much more moving and uncomfortable and painful for me this time than it was, even though I'd already seen that footage.
Seeing her talk about it and the gentleman who was with her holding the two kids, all of that there. You're right, Steve. Absolutely. It was, it was sad to listen to her and what she was like. She was almost numb or a trance or completely like couldn't even have time with her husband to say goodbye to him because so many people had revered him. And, we touch upon the tragedy of this family, the male people in Bruce Lee's family. His father dies a week before his son is born, or after his son is born. I think it's a week before or after his son is born, right? Then Bruce Lee dies, then Brandon Lee dies, right? And it's just like, it's this sad connective tissue amongst the male Lees in that family, the surprising deaths, all three of them unexpectedly passing in their lives, so there's something that's tragic overall about the story. And I think what they touch upon in the documentary is why people revere him and love him the way they do. You can't eliminate the what could have been, adding on to the legacy of Bruce Lee, kind of like with James Dean, what could have been, we missed out on.
Well, he's definitely one of those guys. Something I was thinking about that I never had this thought before is the big thing that people always talk about with Bruce Lee. The big question they ask is, well, how good was he really?
Right.
Could he really, and I think when you look at like Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, it's addressing he couldn't have, he really wasn't as good as he was too cocky and all this stuff.
Right.
And I think that is not an interesting question. Right. I mean, I think that he was really, really good. He's better than a lot of people. He's not as good as he is in the movies because those are movies.
Yeah.
But he was a really, really good martial artist. But the thing that this movie made me think about is like the better question is how good a teacher was he?
Yeah.
And I think, and the reason I say that, and I think he was a great teacher, is that all you can do with the how good was he is have an argument with someone. Oh, I think this person could be, it's like saying, okay, Tyson versus Ali or whatever it is. And you could have an argument about it, but you never get anywhere because we can never test it. But if you think about Bruce Lee as a teacher, well, then you have things to think about. What does be like water mean? What does it mean? Why does he stand this way? Because a teacher in a lot of ways has way more influence than a fighter.
Right.
You know what I mean? Because a teacher has a legacy. They have followers.
Yeah. And you think about Steve, he was teaching in his early 20s. Like that tells you the approach he had. He wasn't just a student. He was also teaching, right? And so certainly he had a belief that he could lead people even at a young age, whether in a small way or in a large way. That was him kind of understanding or organically, like water, understanding where he needed to go, which was to teaching as well as to, acting and creating these films. They were all movements within his life to achieve what he felt he could achieve and wanted to achieve to leave a legacy. And I love that they included in the documentary two things, actually. The idea that thing he's writing, well, I may not accomplish all that I set out to accomplish, kind of mirroring what Martin Luther King Jr. says maybe 2 days before his assassination. I may not get to the mountaintop with you, but I will be there with you. And you see Bruce Lee saying the same thing. I may not accomplish all I want to accomplish in this life, but I'm very happy for what I have accomplished, right? This idea of always appreciating what you have done rather than just constantly be focusing on what you haven't done yet. And I think that's also very intelligent. But the number one thing that stood out for me, Steve, overall, and I know we got to wrap up as we're coming close to the 30-minute mark, is I loved what he said about this idea. I don't believe in style. Style creates separation. And this, once again, it's very simple yet difficult philosophy to put in place because people at that time felt proud to be the best at their style of fighting, their style of martial arts, and them connecting Bruce's thoughts back in the 60s, early 70s to what we see now with the great MMA fighters are able to fight multiple styles in order to achieve championships. And it's why they put Bruce Lee into the UFC game a few years ago as a playable character.
Right.
And you can play Bruce because he was the first one that kind of was pushing, or first famous one or knowledgeable who kept pushing the idea that styles create separation. You have to destroy the idea of styles and create a whole new fluid approach to fighting.
Well, there's many people that credit him as the father of MMA.
Yes,
that say there is no MMA without Bruce Lee.
Yeah,
there's one of his great quotes that I think people continually misuse is study everything, take what is useful, discard the rest. And what I think most people do is they jump right to step 2, is they just discard without the study. And the key to the lesson, and this is to your point, is that you go to the teacher and you study. And even if the thing the teacher is saying, you go, no, this doesn't work. I don't like this. I don't get it. And you still go, but I'm going to 100% invest in studying that thing, because there might be a discovery there. And then once you have studied it and you really can understand it, now you can discard it. Yeah. But until you study it, you can't. And that idea of style of to evolve comes from the study. Yeah. It doesn't like having no style doesn't mean, I don't have to do any hard work. It's like, no, you have to do 10 times as much hard work. You have to practice so much in order to let go of style,
Yeah, exactly. Same thing with acting. Go to the teacher, learn as much as possible from the teacher, and you'll organically understand what you can take from that class that will help you advance as an actor, and what you don't need to take from that class. But you're right, 100% commit and study. Then you can knowledgeably know and organically know what isn't going to work for you and what is. Right. Very good point.
Acting is just really quick. Acting is a perfect metaphor, because you thought all these things and learned all this technique. You can't bring that on the stage or in front of the camera. Right. You have to let it all go. You can't be. You're not thinking about that. You have to be like water. Yeah. You have to be in that moment.
There you go. One last thing as a review, we should say, is there anything you didn't like about the documentary, or that you felt could have been explored more, or you would like to have seen more of?
I mean, it's really, I think it's a really good doc. I want more of the martial arts teaching, more of the ideas of the actual, what he was communicating with his students. What is Jute Keen Do? How does it work? But I don't put that as a criticism of the film, because I don't think I'm the main audience. You know what I mean?
Right. Oh, well, I think my criticism would be that I wish it was longer. I would have liked this to have been a 4-hour documentary or a 6-hour documentary, because Bruce Lee only did 4 films, but that 60 to 72 time, there is so much to explore within each of those sections of his life as he goes through those 12 years, that we could have really absorbed more of, even going back before 1960 to him being a child actor, spend more time in that era. What were the ruffian things he was doing? Boy, beyond the pickpocketing, what else? Did he get into fights? The more you deconstruct the myth and make him human, the more I think that will connect to people in a deeper level. Hey, look, this guy was messing up when he was 10 years old, 12 years old. I'm 15. I've been doing that. Maybe I can turn my life around and become something incredible. And those are things I think documentaries, I would love them to take more time when they're presenting these kinds of things. Because, I mean, we just saw a 10-part documentary, which was, running through an entire season of the NBA. That's just 1 year and really 8 months. It's not 12 years, so I would have liked to have seen more of that, seen him on the set, seen him figuring out directing. What were the issues he had as a director? What were the things he struggled with? What were the things he discovered? All of that. How did Linda help him? How much more did Linda get involved in this situation? What was she exasperated by? What did he credit her for helping her do? What was this issue of marrying a white woman and these Chinese, all of that I would have liked to have seen a lot more explored here with Bruce Lee. And I think there is much more to explore. And maybe someday someone will make a 6 or 6-hour documentary that we can truly savor this man and his incredible effect on the world that is still happening now.
Yeah, totally. I couldn't agree more.
Yeah. All right. Well, that's been our spoiler-filled review of Be Water, the new 30 for 30 documentary from director Bao Nguyen for ESPN. Let us know what you thought about the documentary in the comments section below. Remember to like and share this review on your social media, and subscribe to the Outlaw Nation channel down below. Steve, where can they find you, my man?
They can find me at SR Morris on Twitter and at SR Morris1 on Instagram, and they can find you and I every week on the CineFiles podcast.
Absolutely. Wherever you download podcasts, the Cine-Files, Files, go and find that. And you see the Patreon for the CineFiles right above Steve's head. Come and join that as well and enjoy all the stuff we got going on. You got my Patreon, personal one, above my head as well. All right. Thanks, everybody. Have a great rest of your day. And we'll talk to you next time for another brand new review here on the Outlaw Nation. Take care until then.